Biography, Sunday at noon and 6 p.m. Eastern. Former Michigan Governor James Blanchard discusses his memoir, Behind the Embassy Door, Canada, Clinton, and Quebec. His book describes his experiences as U.S. Ambassador to Canada. Join us for 48 hours of nonfiction books on TV. Book TV on C-SPAN 2. If you'd like to watch Book TV, call your local cable operator and say you want C-SPAN 2.
Now to Capitol Hill, where earlier today Virginia Senator John Warner, who's chairman of the Armed Services Committee, talked about national security issues. He's joined by several other senators.
I almost took over the chairmanship.
That's all right.
We almost had a vote.
Thank you very much for joining us. The committees of the Senate have been moving along on a parallel track as we've been handling this very important matter pending on the floor of the impeachment process. The press statement you have before you gives you a general outline of the progress that we've made in the Armed Services Committee. I'm very pleased today that we completed the markup on two bills relating to pay and retirement benefits. This afternoon we'll have a vote to report those bills to the floor. Tomorrow we'll address the very serious and rapidly evolving issues in Iraq. Next week, a worldwide strategy and threat review, and on it goes with the Secretary of Defense coming in his normal rotation order after addressing the House. With me this morning are members of our committee, and I'd first like to invite our distinguished former chairman, the chairman emeritus, Mr. Thurman, to say a few words. Mr. Thurman.
Thank you. I'm not here to announce I'm going to take the chairmanship back. I'm delighted to be here. John Warner is making an excellent chairman, and we're proud of him. I just want to say to you that we have the finest military in the world, and I want all of it to help us keep it.
Thank you very much, Senator Thurman. The initial objectives of our committee are, of course, with the pay and retirement, which we'll discuss. Chairman Allard of the subcommittee will give you details. But the entire committee is first want to pay its respect and gratitude to the chairman and other members of the Joint Chiefs for showing a measure of courage unprecedented in appearing before our committee last September and again several weeks ago to describe their top priorities. Among them, of course, foremost was the pay and retirement, but also the need for additional defense spending. The Republican leader, Senator Lott, members of this committee, and others have constantly in the past 6 months brought to the attention of the administration the desperate need to stop for the 14th year a decline in defense spending. And now we're pleased that the President at long last has recognized this, and that with the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman in their posture statements, they will be advocating a level of increased spending. I and other members of the committee as yet are not satisfied with that level. I feel very strongly there are other critical areas, not across the entire spectrum, but critical areas within the defense budget that need special attention and additional dollars. Also, in reorganizing the committee, with the consent of all members of the committee and indeed the urging, we've established a special subcommittee to recognize the highest priority that must be given to the emerging threats, whether it's weapons of mass destruction or information, weaponry, and the like. And frankly, I credit the President at this moment when so much discredit is being spread around. I credit him for recognizing that we on the committee feel this way. We've established a subcommittee, and now he has gone to the country to outline the criticality of the threat here at home in the United States. We've got to focus within our own borders as to these threats. And momentarily I'll call on the new chairman of that subcommittee. Senator McCain is a senior member of our committee, and in his capacity as chairman of the Commerce Committee could not be a subcommittee chairman. But Senator, perhaps you could set the tone for this press conference.
Thank you very much, Chairman Warner and Senator Thurman and all my colleagues. I'll be very brief. The President gave an hour and 17 or hour and 25-minute speech the other night to the nation. He had one line in it concerning Kosovo, where if you look at the papers this morning, there is now an administration proposal to send American troops. There was no line about Korea, where the Korean talks have just broken down again, and the Koreans are hell-bent on developing a nuclear weapon and are refusing inspections and refusing to comply to the NPT, to which they are signatories. We're now in a cat-and-mouse game with Saddam Hussein, where almost daily our pilots and crews are exposed to danger from Iraqi surface-to-air missiles, remembering that we struck Iraq because of the failure to allow our United Nations inspectors to inspect. Does anybody believe that the inspectors will be back anytime soon? Instead of striking the command and control in the air bases where these threats to our American pilots originate, we are now doing what was reminiscent of what we did in another conflict a long time ago, and that is some kind of graduated response, which sooner or later will lead to the loss of an American airplane and pilot unless we stop this threat from where it originates. And here we are, with a military that recently, one of the best examples, that is not prepared. Recently, the USS Enterprise deployed to the Persian Gulf area short 700 trained and qualified personnel. Pilots are leaving the military faster than we can train them. Our recruiting goals are being lowered, both as far as numbers as well as quality. And we are in trouble as far as national defense is concerned. This administration has conducted a feckless photo-op foreign policy, and I am grateful that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and others came over and asked for additional funds. Those additional funds are not there completely in the President's request, and as usual, we're seeing the shell game of $4 billion due to inflation costs, $4 billion due to fuel savings. Really, there's an increase of about $4 billion, which is far below what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Joint Chiefs said was absolutely minimal for them to be able to carry out their mission. What we have done in the committee is a first step in trying to restore the morale and readiness of our armed forces. The first priority that the military asked for was a restoration of the 50% retirement system. We have 11,000 enlisted families in the United States military on food stamps today. That's a disgrace, and we've got to stop it, and we have to remedy that. I hope the administration will give its wholehearted support rather than its half-hearted and dilatory support of the compelling requirements of the military. I've talked too long. I want to thank our chairman. I want to thank Senator Thurman and all members of this committee for their efforts in trying to rectify a compelling national security issue, which, if not cured, will lead to a needless expenditure of American blood and treasure.
Thank you very much, Senator. Recognizing we're going to vote at 1 o'clock and recognizing we want very much to allow questions, we're going to have each of the subcommittee chairmen just in order. Mr. Smith, for a minute or two.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Many of us, certainly on our side of the aisle, were aware of the fact that this was a train wreck that was going to happen with the readiness problems that we foresaw, the fact that our retirement, the military retirement system was driving people out of the military rather than encouraging them to stay. The pay was low, and we spoke out on this. And as the chairman has said, finally, the Joint Chiefs did come forth and accent it. We are now trying to assess these problems and not only assess them, but to take care of them. And it's not going to be easy. And as Senator McCain correctly said, the money in the budget that the President has presented is not there to do what has been asked. It's probably 1/6 of what the Joint Chiefs said we would need in the first year alone to do this in real dollars. So we've got a lot of work to do, but let me just quickly say regarding my own subcommittee, the strategic subcommittee, there are two areas that I intend to address. One, of course, is missile defense, which I know others will speak on. But we said when the Rumsfeld Commission came out that they were bringing out information that was very, very critical, that backed what we had been saying all along about missile defense. Now the administration says, whoops, I guess the Rumsfeld Commission was correct. We also know that the North Koreans, with their Taepodong-2 launch capacity, is getting close now to reaching U.S. shores, if they're not already there. And the Chinese exercises last month targeted Taiwan and our troops in Korea with missiles. This is serious business, and it has to be addressed. And I intend to address it, and I know my colleagues as well, with appropriate hearings. We do have a piece of legislation, which is a good one, which has bipartisan support with Dan Inouye and Thad Cochran. We intend to address that bill quickly and get it passed, I hope. Finally, on the one other issue, you know, the 20th century was a century that saw air power, as Senator McCain well knows, become the dominant force in our military activities in the 20th century. But as we move into the 21st century, we're going to have to be looking at space power and control of space and the assets of space. This administration has been lacking in that regard, and I intend to be holding some hearings on space power and how important that will be to the 21st century. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You mentioned the ABM treaty. We'll be taking a look at that.
We will be looking at the ABM treaty as to whether or not the ABM treaty in any way interferes with the capacity of the United States of America to defend itself, either with a national missile system or even with theater systems. Thank you.
It's imperative that Russia recognize that we have to have paramount our own security, and we as a nation are now threatened by missile systems and other nations in Russia. Jim Imhoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think everyone realizes that what happened this morning and what we're planning to do is critical. But, you know, it's just a small part of the problem. It's which is hemorrhaging the most right now. I think probably this is what's hemorrhaging the most, because we're losing our talented young people out of the services by droves and by numbers and percentages unprecedented. So it's significant that they get the message loud and clear, which I'm sure you will share with them, that we're doing something about it, and we're going to do it very quickly. However, equally of concern is our modernization program, our force strength. Right now we're at 60% of the force strength that we were in 1991 in I believe, in a world that is more threatening than it was at that time. I passed out a news release that does have some of the details in it, but I think it's very important for us to realize that the crisis that we're facing, it goes far beyond how we're going to handle the personnel situation. I was disturbed after 77 minutes of the State of the Union message that there are 90 seconds devoted to the most critical and serious problem facing this nation. That's what's happened to our defense system. And I would have to say also, Mr. Chairman, you mentioned the ABM treaty. Even the architect of that ABM treaty, Henry Kissinger, said this is no longer the environment where you have two superpowers, but you have a proliferation of weapons of mass destruction along with the missiles to deliver them. And he said, and this is a quote, he said, it's nuts to make a virtue out of our vulnerability. So we're going to have to get up to the point where the chief said we have to be, and that is an additional $25 billion a year over the next 6 years. Is that attainable or is it not attainable? It's not nearly the challenge that we had back in 1980 when, using today's dollars, we had to actually increase it by $250 billion over that same 6-year period. So it's doable. It's got to be done.
Senator.
I'm Senator Pat Roberts. I have the privilege of being the chairman of a new subcommittee on the Armed Services Committee. It's called Emerging Threats and Capabilities. We're going to take a hard look at the emerging threats that we deem of real interest, a real threat, if you will, to our vital national security interests. What am I talking about? We're talking about the weapons of mass destruction, information warfare, crime, and terrorism. We have already had a lengthy discussion with the administration, and we'll be working with the Boren and Rudman Commission, which is assigned to do more or less the same thing. We've met with General Charles Boyd in that regard, and we're working with the National Security Council in regard to their overall efforts. We're going to try to do a little better on the side of better coordination and we're going to try to come up with a series of hearings with advice and counsel from all sorts of experts to say what are the emerging threats that do really threaten our vital national security. Then we're going to invite most of the military in, the sinks, and other people to take a look at the capabilities. It's an exciting new subcommittee, and I want to close by saying what an exciting day this is. I've got the flu. I don't feel worth a damn. And the military has had the flu for about the last 2 or 3 years, and we had the Joint Chiefs finally come up last year and tell us what they needed. I introduced a retirement reform bill along with Senator McCain, and the chairman chipped in with a pay raise bill, and we have a comprehensive bill that everybody has already talked about. It is a wonderful message to our men and women in uniform that we care, we're doing something about it. This bill's going to be out of committee, already is out of committee, and it will be on the floor as soon as we get the impeachment trial done. It's a good day for the military.
I'm chairman of the subcommittee on Air Land, which is modernization accounts for the Air Force and the Army. Let me first comment on this legislation. It is unusual for us to move a piece of legislation like this separate from the authorization bill. But as was said in committee today over and over again, every single day, one serviceman man or woman is making a decision as to whether to stay in the military. And the millions of dollars that we've invested in them and the abilities that we need to run these accounts that I'm going to be overseeing, running this equipment. And every day we do not send a message, we don't go out there and send a message that we are going to improve the quality of life for them and the services. It means we're going to lose people. And so that's why it's absolutely essential for us to move now, to act now, not delay this, but to get the message out there loud and clear that we are concerned about keeping them here and we are going to provide adequate pay and adequate benefits for them as incentives to stay in the military. Very quickly, and I know there's others, we're going to look at we're going to look at the modernization accounts, which is, you know, as Jim Inhofe said, I mean, there's fires burning everywhere, and I can stand up here and make the argument that we need to have more resources to be able to buy the equipment to make sure that we maintain our capabilities and maintain the advantages that we need across the world. And the fact of the matter is the money isn't there. And we have lots of programs that we simply can't buy efficiently because we just don't have enough money to do it. We're going to have to take a very hard look at, number one, how we can get more money in those accounts, but number two, how we can efficiently spend that money to meet the threats that are out there, and that's a great challenge for us.
Just one correction, Senator. I think there are hundreds of men and women in the armed forces every day making the decision to leave because of the failures of the past. Senator Allard.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm Wayne Allard from Colorado. I'm the new chairman on the Personnel Committee, the Subcommittee on Armed Services. And I'd just like to say, just to start out with, in regard to the armed forces, we rely on them, and I think they ought to be able to rely on us. And I would say that I think the policy where we're increasing commitments overseas and then cutting defense spending is wrong-headed, and it's not doing justice to the men and women who have decided to serve this country in the armed services. After many pleas from the Secretary of Defense and the Joint Chiefs, the administration finally put forward a pay raise and a retirement initiative for our military. But with recruitment and retention, as was mentioned earlier, already at critical and dangerous lows, we believe that we needed to do more with the Soldiers' Bill of Rights, and I think that bill does just that. We provided and let me provide a more detailed outlook of that particular piece of legislation by just giving you a few of the highlights. A 4.8% pay raise pegged to the Employment Cost Index plus 0.5% to address the growing pay gap problem. Retirement options to better meet the needs of our military, including a new thrift savings plan, a special retention initiative to pay scale reform for critical need areas such as the pilots and the computer programmers and surface warfare officers, just to name a few. And there's $180 subsistence assistance for those personnel who are on food stamps. And finally, there's a GI Bill education enhancement provision. Now, this bill is just a start, and I think as a member of that committee, chairman of that committee, we're going to have to continue to review these issues on retention and recruitment. It's an ongoing problem, and as long as our economy is doing well and we have people looking and making choices between whether they want to serve in the military and the private sector, we have to be prepared to make sure that we get the best qualified men and women to serve us in the armed forces. I will emphasize that as a member of this subcommittee, I think an additional function of ours is oversight, and we're going to continue to follow these issues closely. I think it's an important function, and I am looking forward to serving and working with the chairman and other members of the Armed Service Committee.
Thank you very much, Senator. A former member of our committee, distinguished senator from Texas, is going to perhaps have the First Amendment on the floor to our bill, and if you just take 1 minute to sort of outline that.
Thank you, Senator Warner. I appreciate your letting me come in because there is one more piece of what I think is a very important package to retain our best people, and that is health care for our military personnel. If I am visiting Dyess Air Force Base in Abilene, or I'm in Saudi Arabia or Bosnia visiting with our troops, the number 2 complaint that I get after pay and retiree benefits is health care. They are worried because their families at home are not getting the health care that is what we have promised to our personnel, and certainly not the health care they deserve. So I will have an amendment that I will be working with the committee to put forward that would take some first steps to make sure that TRICARE, where TRICARE is in place, does meet the standard, and we give reimbursements enough that doctors are willing to be a part of TRICARE, as we also work on the issue of a downsized military, a downsized health care facility in our military, but with a level number of people who deserve the health care benefits. That is a squeeze that we have got to put some money and some time and thought into correcting. So that's going to be one more piece of keeping our very best people in the military.
Thank you very much, Senator, and we'll have that as an amendment. Now we'll open the floor to any questions you have.
Senator Warner, how will you vote on the motion to dismiss this afternoon, and why?
I will answer that question and remain to do so, but I first defer to those questions on the military, and then I will remain for any question on impeachment. Yes?
If you would like to put in the added money that the chiefs have recommended over the past year, there's still a shortfall between what the administration is going to propose for defense and what they told you they needed. How can you do that with the existing budget caps? Do you think it'll be a tougher fight this year?
Senator Domenici is addressing this very question at this time. I want to make certain you understand that we are fully appreciative of the higher level of funding as described by the chairman and other members of the Joint Chiefs. And that delta between what the president has announced that he was willing to do and their figure is considerable. This committee will selectively go within that delta and determine where specifically in the defense bill additional dollars will be addressed. And those dollars, the Budget Committee, I think if we have the assurance, can be found. Anybody else? Yes.
Are you in favor of 2 additional BRAC rounds?
Beg pardon?
Are you in favor of 2 additional BRAC rounds as proposed, as is going to be proposed?
The question of BRAC is one that our committee will discuss on a policy basis early on. And I am not able, of course, then to speak for the committee at this time. I can only speak for myself. And that is the predicate on which the Secretary of Defense will be speaking for additional savings, and I understand he'll do that tomorrow, is a sound one. There isn't a person up here that doesn't recognize that there are, within our current structure of bases and other, additional space than we need, additional bases. But you show me a bill that is absolutely bulletproof to politics and that can withstand any type of assault that the president leveled on us in the last round, and I happen to be co-author of that bill that was circumvented, then I think support can be forthcoming. Anybody else wish to comment on that?
Let me just say that it's part of an overall challenge that we face, and I think the chairman and the committee is going about it the right way. First, we've got to restore the morale and the personnel problems that plague the military, to modernize the force. But we also have to restructure our military in order to meet the post-Cold War challenges, and we also have to do our part to reduce unnecessary spending. Everyone agrees that there are bases that need to be closed, and everyone knows that unless we do that, billions of dollars are going to be expended to keep those bases operating that are otherwise would be used for much higher priorities in the defense establishment. There is legitimate anger on the part of Congress over the way the last base closing commission was treated because of McClellan and Kelly, because of those two bases. There is no doubt that there is the politicization of that process, which aroused great anger, especially, I might add, amongst some of our colleagues from Texas and California. But the point is, we can pass a bill that begins after the first base closing, there has to be two of them, can begin the year 2001 with a new administration and can put in sufficient safeguards so this process is not politicized. And let me just finally sum up. We have no credibility if we don't have a base closing commission, because we're willing, for the sake of hometown or home state politics, to allow a wasteful and unnecessary spending to go forward when we are claiming that we are zealously spending and most efficiently spending the taxpayers' dollars.
Thank you very much, Senator. Any other questions on defense? If not, I'll acknowledge your question. Thank you, John. Yes, thank you.
Yes, just yesterday, Secretary of State Albright said that there is a question now whether or not troops will be sent to Bosnia in a peace settlement.
And Kosovo?
Excuse me, in Kosovo.
All right, I'll speak to that issue. And I can only speak for myself on this issue because at the moment, while I have counseled with other senators, I'm the one that's out furthest on this issue, and I have been on it now for 6 months. The NATO structure is under the command of an American general. It has been from the inception, and I hope it will continue indefinitely. If that's the case, any NATO force, wherever it will be in the world, should have a U.S. component. In my judgment, Kosovo at this point in time is in desperate need of a force which can just be what I call a stabilizing, deterrent force against all factions, be they the insurgent Albanians, the KLA, or the Serbians, to maintain a degree of peace and order so that the OSCE and other UN organizations, as well as the NGOs who are bravely trying to bring in food and supply so they can function. And so I have said steadfastly that the time has come that we've got to look at the need to put that force in. The question then is, does it go in by force itself, or does Milosevic somehow agree to it? And it seems to me the latter is the focal point of the administration at long last, to look at that together with the other nations of the world, which are going to tell him in no uncertain terms that that deterrent force has to come into being. I will try and spearhead that initiation by the administration if they will come out and join on it.
Sir, you have
I will. To the question of the gentleman here about my votes, I will certainly not in any way cast a vote, now or in the future, that would circumvent this process. And therefore, I will oppose the motion to dismiss, and likewise vote in favor of bringing in witnesses. We cannot talk about our closed meetings, which incidentally, in my judgment, I think are some of the extraordinary events where bipartisanship can come to the forefront. There's an old saying in the Navy, run silent, run deep. But let me tell you, bipartisanship is running silently and running deep and running forcefully on both sides to try and bring about closure on this issue, closure in a manner that supports the Constitution of the United States, is fair to the President and other parties, and sets a precedent for future generations to look back as to how this Senate handled the difficult question of impeachment. I feel very strongly, were we not to allow witnesses, we would be setting a precedent whereby a future Congress could threaten a president with impeachment and deny him, based on this precedent, the ability to bring forth witnesses in his defense. We could never permit that. The political process in this country, in my brief 21 years in the Senate, is becoming more and more difficult for any candidate, whether it's for that Congress or for the presidency, to get into office and indeed maintain themselves in office, given the crossfire of partisanship, the ever-increasing amount of money in politics, and a lot of other things that make it far more difficult to maintain office today. We've got to draw and make it very clear the division lines between the executive and legislative branches, and to make certain that the executive branch is secure from an imbalance and a challenge by the legislative branch in a future impeachment proceeding.
Senator, that sounds like a man who doesn't think these charges should have been brought in the first place. Am I reading you wrong?
You're reading me wrong. Any other question? Thank you very much.
Can you tell us any more details about the role that you and Senator Snowe have been playing in trying to...
The majority leader has designated a group of senators to look at a series of possibilities in terms of finding a fact. I'm one of that group. I urge the leader to do this, and I appreciate his doing so. I want to say that I think both leaders, Republican and Democrat, have showed a great measure of courage and leadership, and indeed I think there isn't a day that goes